I have been comparing my ability to express myself in my native language to the way I speak in English and consciously trying to analyze the expressions that I use both in my language and English, and if I use the parasitic words, if I use the pause fillers, if it's something that I do both in my native language or if it's just something that's connected to the issues that I have with speaking properly in English, because not only do I have to think of what I'm going to say, but I also have to think of the correct translation, the usage of the words, if the word I chose actually does fit into that sentence, if it's possible to use it grammatically, if it's an idiom or a phrase that's being actually used by native speakers. And it seems to me so far that I am semi able to sound like an actual human being in my language, but the moment I want to project that into English, that's where the difficulties come. And I think I have noticed an improvement of sorts, uh, thanks to those 30-ish videos that I've recorded so far. I also thought about the format I am using to record these. It's as if sort of a stream, but just in front of myself as an audience. And obviously, if I actually streamed, that would be much more helpful than what I'm currently doing. But I also don't think that I would have been ever able to stream what I'm doing in terms of content that I am using to fill in these recordings. I would also love to work on my diction to be able to modulate my own voice in a way that would be more pleasing to the poor listener's ear outside of singing that I've done in the past for a few years. Not exactly on a truly professional level, but almost there. And it's an entirely different thing when I'm just talking to myself, recording it using a software. I would really love to focus heavily on the fillers, on the and that I have mentioned before in my videos, since I don't really use them in my native language, and I would be very happy if I was able to fix that in my English, because that's what I'm currently working on, and I think it's important enough to warrant my not exactly full attention. I have many other problems that I need to focus on in terms of English and my ability to form phrases, but it's definitely up there alongside with commas, which is something that I've never learned in school, and it's quite complicated. I would even say that it's more complicated than in my native language, where commas are rather self-explanatory. Meanwhile, in English, there are quite a lot of exceptions, and sometimes they feel a little bit confusing. So that's what I'm going to be working on in terms of my English. And now for Asterix, I am slowly but surely running out of the comic books that I've read in my childhood and even in the later years of my life. And At some point, I've just stopped caring, or not exactly caring, but I had other things to read, other things to focus on, and Asterix kind of slipped my mind, and thus the newer volumes, mostly those that were only worked on by Albert Uderzo, since René Goscinny passed quite soon, unfortunately. I don't think I even owned all of those, and I've especially never really read those that came past the year 2000, since I think a new pair of authors took over, artist and writer, and I've never really interacted with those, so I'm slowly getting to a point where I'll have to take care of those two movies that I've mentioned that I would like to talk about, and then it will be time to choose a new project for myself. Now we are in the village of the Gauls, seeing a rather common scene in these parts, and that's a huge brawl, probably started over some not so fresh fish, and we see the Bard still being tied up after the last banquet, and he's hopping his way towards the fighting villagers in hopes that he'll get untied. This common Gaul entertainment is interrupted by Asterix and Obelix, who rush into the village with great news that some new Roman soldiers arrived to the camps surrounding the village and are ready for picking. Now, when Asterix and Obelix are sent to investigate, they find the Roman soldiers to be quite pleased and happy with the fact that they are in the vicinity of the village, which usually they don't react in a positive way to, but this time something has changed. So when they report to the village, they are sent to interrogate one of the soldiers that, after a series of not exactly appreciated jokes that poke fun at some of the Belgians, decides to take a stroll around the forest. Then he is interrupted by Asterix and Obelix, and after a short roughing up, he confesses that they are here on leave, since they've been fighting the Belgians, who turned out to be quite fierce fighters, so much that even Caesar himself said that he considers them the bravest of all Gauls, which is supposedly a historical fact that he actually said that. And when Asterix and Obelix report this fact to the village chief, he is instantly enraged because he thinks that they are losing the respect of Caesar and his soldiers, and so he decides to call for a meeting of all the most important people in the village, where he tries to persuade everyone how big of a deal it is. Unfortunately, they don't seem to be quite as invested into this issue as he is, so he just decides to leave by himself. And unfortunately, his mood isn't exactly improved by the fact that even his wife asks him in a rather unperturbed way to buy some fish, preferably fresh this time. So he storms out and finds out that he is being followed by Asterix and Obelix, sent by Panoramix to make sure that the chief is safe and that the story gets its usual happy ending at the banquet. Now, on the border with Belgium, there is one soldier who's all battered and beaten on the side of Belgium, and on the other one is a perfectly fresh and clean soldier who's apparently got the safe side of the border thanks to his uncle being a senator. Then he demands apology and is interrupted by the Gauls, who promptly dispatch him. And when he falls back to the ground with the same black eye the other soldier has, the one on the Belgium side apologizes and admits that we really are all equal in the army. Then they meet the Belgians, and after a short argument, they decide to show the Gauls who's the better fighter and who's better at destroying the camps that the Romans built. They completely decimate one, and then it's the Gauls' turn, who doped on the strengthening potion also completely decimate another camp, and then are invited to the village of the Belgians, where a rather lavish feast is laid in front of them, which also turns into an argument between who's the bravest. So they decide to demolish all the camps surrounding their village, and that Caesar will be the one who will judge who is the best fighter out of these two different sides. Now, in one of the camps, the soldier is preparing some hot oil to pour it upon the attackers. He's trying to get it appropriately hot, but unfortunately he doesn't make it, because when asked if the oil is hot enough, he responds that it's getting there. Unfortunately, the soldier that asked him reports that it's getting pretty hot on their side as well. Then obviously the camp gets completely trashed by the Belgians, and they report for the proper score to the centurion that it was the Belgians. On the side of our Gauls, they are taking another camp that attempts to shoot a catapult at them. The stone gets caught by Asterix, and then he throws it. Unfortunately, he overthrows the camp and sinks the poor pirates, who, unfortunately, this time were really just minding their own business and were staying neutral. Unfortunately, the stone doesn't care, and thus their ship was completely destroyed. Then the carnage continues, and when all the camps assigned to both sides are destroyed, the Gauls and the Belgians are expecting some results or some reaction from Caesar, but it turns out that his attention is aimed elsewhere, and thus Asterix and Obelix are on their way to him to ask for the results directly, which obviously angers him quite a lot, and then he decides to lead an army against the village. The Belgians refuse any help from the Gauls, but obviously they still decide to help, and they unknowingly interrupt an ambush set up by Caesar to flank the Belgians, and after a fierce fight, Caesar is forced to retreat after stating the famous sentence in this series that he doesn't know who's the bravest, but he is absolutely sure that they are all equally crazy, which sends the two previously competing chieftains into a fit of laughter, and all ends with another feast in the Belgians' village. And when they come back, the chieftain gets welcomed by his wife, who asks him if he haven't forgot to buy the fish she asked for when they were leaving. And at the end, there is another banquet where the poor bard Trubadix is again tied to a tree, gagged, and from a hole in that tree there is an owl looking at him quite questioningly. And that's the end of Asterix in Belgium.